Kyle, today let's talk about reactivity versus creativity.
Let's go. Let's go. Welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of the Contagious Culture Podcast. Look, we are back on another episode. And the goal of this podcast is to help you create ecosystems and environments where people thrive. Look, Dan and I were having a phenomenal conversation before we got on, before we pressed that big red button that says record. Dan was a little hesitant to press record today, which is interesting. But we were having a lot of fun, and he said something that we believe is going to transform how you approach leadership, how you approach networking, and how you approach the next 6 steps that you make in building your specific vision wherever you are. So let's tap in. Look, if it's your first episode, if this is your first time with us, go ahead and like the episode. Go ahead and share it with somebody that you believe that would really benefit from these messages, and review the episode. Literally right now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on all podcast platforms. But we are excited for you to be here with us. And what you're going to get in all of our episodes is practical strategies, methodologies, tips, tricks, tools for you to level up your leadership so that you can ultimately level up your organization. It's funny because I was having a conversation with my father at lunch. Super grateful that I get to spend more time with him in his older age. And I was explaining to him that before you can have more, you have to do more. But before you can do more, you have to go through a process of becoming more. You have to be the person that can actually do the work at a higher level so that you can then be able to achieve and have and receive more of what you're trying to accomplish. So let's get into it, Dan. Talk to us. We can't get into it, brother, because you are muted.
Oh, man. First time for everything. Kyle, I want to ask you a question, and I want to put you in the hot seat here because it's not really a hot seat, but I think you'll have a great answer. You're great off the cuff. I want to talk about how reactivity stunts creativity. But then I want to back it up further, and I want us to talk about what stimulates creativity. And if we're not stimulating the creativity, we're being reactive. So I want to ask you, what kinds of things in your work spur your creativity? You're an incredibly creative guy. What kinds of things, anything, what spur your creativity?
That's a great question. So if I were to break this down in 3 words, it would be space, time, and experience. Space, time, and experience. I am very, very intentional with creating spaces in my life where I am having conversations, learning, listening, and I've developed an environment around me of a lot more people that are much more creative than I am. So my first question to our listeners is, do you have an environment of people that operate at a high level in your specific space that you are in? For the longest, I used to think that I was driven to make change and all these different things. So I went into education because I literally thought that the only way that you can make impact is by working at a school. Until I met with Angela Howard, based in Chicago, that is creating these safe spaces, innovative spaces to transform culture. Until I connected with Naomi Hathaway, that is in the West Coast, that is doing just absolutely phenomenal work in regards to redesigning how we engage with boards. Until I met with Dr. Pael Berry in Southern California, Los Angeles, that is designing these invite-only intentional spaces where social impact leaders gather and share best practices. Until I met with Lena Ref, on that last name, that has traveled to 60 plus countries and that is doing global humanitarian work and transformed my own thinking in regards to not just focusing on major giving, but also identifying little things that we can do to be able to make a big change in our communities. So those are 4 names of all women. Shout out to Women History Month in March that are doing transformational work. So I had to first create a space. Number 2 is time. I have intentional pockets of time throughout the day where I literally do nothing. Because what I used to think is that doing nothing literally meant doing nothing, but doing nothing is actually doing something. I'm taking time to think. I'm taking time to write. I'm taking time to potentially just watch a movie and be entertained. I'm taking time to literally just lay on the couch and scroll. I'm taking time to literally just sit on the floor and just look at the fan go over and over and try to focus my mind to count how many propellers are on the actual fan. Just this weird stuff that I do in my free time, people. Or I'm like just taking time to think about one idea and then just going deep in that one idea. So my next question to my audience is, when is the last time that you actually took time to think, to create, to draw, to color? Like I take time during the day to color with my kids. Like literally we'll get a coloring book and I'm coloring on one side and they're coloring on the other side. And then the third piece to the puzzle is experience. I was having a conversation with someone earlier, like every single day, I find myself talking to an executive director of a nonprofit. Every single day. I have to at least block 30 minutes to just chat. And in those conversations, I literally write down specific things that come up that I can then go and create on social media or on LinkedIn or on articles or in podcast episodes. And I'm always finding those conversations so valuable so that I can stay close to the work. So for me, reactivity does stunt the growth of creativity, in my opinion, because you're not taking space, you're not taking time, you're not creating a space, you're not taking time, and you're not actually doing the work. So you don't really know what the market needs.
Have your flowers, take a second, look up at the fan. You use a lot of brain power in that one. I want to ask you again, I'll probably get you on another tangent here. So if you don't have those processes, right? You just talked about those are all processes. If you don't have those processes, you don't get that creativity. Right? So if you lack those processes, you're going to lack the creativity, which means that you're going to be reactive to all of your situations because you're not thinking of them ahead of time to find creative solutions. And that's what I really want us to dive into today. You know, I've been thinking about, you have those processes. What are the processes of the people listening to this, right? Do you have an executive thought partner? Do you have a network? Do you have a group? Do you have a podcast with guests like we do that helps stimulate our minds? That if you want to be the best leader you can and you want to be creative and not reactive, and if you really think about it, you could probably interchange creativity and proactivity, right? Because if that's the opposite of reactivity, being proactive is the opposite of reactive.
Exactly.
So let's tie those together, right? So being creative is being proactive versus being reactive. And if you are reactive, you don't have the processes. But if you are creative and proactive, you have the processes to set yourself up in those spaces. So we ask you leaders on this call, what resources do you have that you've created? Now, Kyle and I both know I have the executive thought partner, and this is the kind of stuff that I think about. These are the conversations that I have with my coach, just like we are coaches to the Growth Lab and the Growth Alliance and the work that we do. And I had this conversation with my coach today, and we were talking about when you're reactive because of this brain fog, right? Because of clinging to this one identity that you have or that you're stuck on in your mind. Or You're lacking the emotional ability or the language to spin the creativity that you need. Kyle, what are you feeling about that? When I say all of that, what just comes to your mind immediately?
What comes to my mind immediately is that if you're not creating spaces to be more creative, you're being selfish.
Mm, mm,
We had a great conversation earlier with the executive director of the Innovation Barn, an organization that's based here in Charlotte that's doing just cutting edge, just innovative work. And we asked her a question about how would you define innovation? Because it's,
mm,
in a lot of conversation, everybody thinks they're being innovative and
mhm,
scaling and all these buzzwords that they use. So I asked her the definition and she put it simply, you're just doing things differently.
mm,
But you can't do things differently until you recognize what's already out there.
mm,
And you can't do things differently well until you recognize what the impact of why we're doing this differently and how it can impact other people. So I believe if you're not taking this time and space to do things differently, innovatively, you're being selfish because you're only really thinking about you and not about the people that you're trying to serve and how you can be creating differentiation and a unique selling proposition so that it can engage better with the people. It can land better with the people that you're serving, and so that you can create a different experience. I think when we think about the Contagious Culture Conference that we're getting ready to, have in October of this year, we had to have a landscape analysis of what was already out there. When you look at AFP and when you look at all these other organizations that are doing conferences, we said collectively and creatively that, look, we want to do this differently. But we had to identify what different looked like. We had to identify what's already out there and then what would different look like. And then we took it a step further. We wanted to have this immersive experience in person. But then the challenge was that, look, this isn't different, Dan. This isn't different, Kyle. This is exactly what other organizations are doing. When you're having 500, 600, 1,000 people there, what different required is us taking it online and then creating a more intimate experience in person so that we can have time, space, and create environments where we're actually touching the people and doing the work. So it required us to have time to not just be reactive and keep doing this, but to actually be creative and innovative in how we're approaching the work so that we can create a better and an enhanced experience for the people that we're serving.
Kyle, you brought up something really great there, and I think this is really important for those listening too. When people think of systems and processes, they think of regiment, right? They think of putting like it has to be ABC, a type A personality. There have to be processes, there have to be this. But I think there are two sides to that, right? When you're a leader, you have to understand that we need these systems in place and these processes in place. But within those systems and processes, it doesn't have to be rigid. You have to have the guide of where you need to go and how to get there, right? Just like we have in the Growth Alliance, we have the 12 weeks.
Yeah.
We know how to get there. Do we always go off on a little tangent in every meeting? Absolutely.
Definitely.
Right? But is it valuable? Absolutely. And
Mhm.
all of our members get excited and they dive into it, just like we did last week talking about the 30-second pitch and the minute pitch. And you had everyone do that. They loved that and they felt the confidence, and that brought something so special to them. So it's important to think about when we talk about being reactive, having no process, but then people equate process and systems with being regimented, which
Mhm.
is not creativity, right? There's a nuance there of the process and the system is the way to get there, right? But it's
Exactly.
the pieces inside that can be so creative and adaptable.
It's interesting because I don't know why my mind is going here, but it's going here. It reminds me of church, right? I think that when I think of some of the best spiritual leaders, no matter what you believe or who you follow or whatever the case may be, I believe the best spiritual leaders don't just stick to the script, right? Like you have planned notes, you have a framework in which you're working to develop, But if you are led,
Mm.
whether it's by the spirit or just led in that moment to move off of the script to be able, because you recognize that the people that are in front of you, your audience, need something different or more intentional or more intimate experience, then you have the capability, the depth, the knowledge to be able to pull while still wrapping around to a transformational message. And when you think about the best motivational or keynote speakers, when you think about the best pastors, coaches, facilitators, and here's the thing, when you think about the best leaders, a great leader is, yes, we have an agenda, but on line item 3, I recognize that my team is dragging and they're not really here. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to do a temperature check on our team and then do a listening tour right now. That is leadership. When I think about the best leaders, I may have a script in order how this is supposed to go, but I recognize donors or employees or our contributors or benefiters require something else. So it might require some flexibility, because one thing that I recognized, and shout out to Patricia Bravo for bringing this to my attention, is that human perspective, human voice, human experience is also data. And a lot of times we're reacting based upon the fact, but we're not considering the human experience, the human response, and the human voice, and understanding how to assess that also as data points so that we can be more creative and effective in what we're doing. That's kind of my perspective on that one.
Yeah, well, I mean, qualitative data, that's what that is, right? The quantitative data is what everyone thinks about, but it's the qualitative data, the conversations, the one-on-ones, the stakeholder reviews. Kyle, I want to end this conversation and ask the leaders out there, what kind of processes and systems do you have in place? We talk about that all the time, right? But it's not just what do you have in place and what's point A to point B, right? But it's how are you inspiring creativity in those processes and systems versus reactivity? How are you posing those opportunities to your teams that allow them to bring great ideas back to improve those processes and systems? They're the people that are doing the work. So what does that look like for you? And how can you put that together? And that can be another episode.
Dan, I'm gonna ask you a question because I believe that the audience would benefit from the answer. If you approach your week right now and you have tasks, you have meetings on the calendar, you have all of these responsibilities, what are 1 to 3 actionable steps, habits, behaviors that a listener could take away right now so that they can be able to implement the various things that we discussed today in their day-to-day so that it can level up their leadership and improve their posture as an executive?
I think the first one is document everything. If you're trying to figure out what other processes and systems, you need to understand what are the steps that could get you there. And to do that, you need to know what's happening, what's going on, what you need to do. And using the calendar as an example, Kyle, with everything going on, write down everything that you believe that you need to do to reach that goal for you and your team. The second thing for me is figure out the prioritization of that. Figure out not just point A to point B. Sometimes you can go from point B to point D. Sometimes you can skip over things, right? You may have a great conversation coming up and it just expedites the move forward. But if you're just looking at A, B, C, D, E, you're not going to see that opportunity, that maximum opportunity for growth. So understanding, once you've documented everything, what are the priorities? Where are the areas for growth and creativity that could really expedite the work that you're doing, fast track that work? And I think The last thing, Kyle, we talked about documenting everything, prioritizing everything. And I think the last thing is collaborating, right? We talk about in the executive thought partner a lot is collaboration and the lens in which we see the world. And it's tough for a lot of people to see beyond the lens that they see. I had a conversation today with another consultant, and we talked about being a leader is being able to see everything from the 30,000-foot view, being able to see the forest. But then it's also being able to dive down to the trees and say, how do these trees interconnect to create the forest? But then what's the ecosystem look like in those trees that can affect how the forest grows, right? Is there a disease going on with the pine trees that's going to kill those pine trees? What does that look like? So the third thing to me is being aware and understanding, how do these things collaborate? How does everything work together? Because then you can work that backwards as well. You can work that back to the priorities and then back to those items that you've documented together, and then you can move them back forward. And that's going to really instill that creative process in the work that you're doing.
Documentation, prioritization, collaboration. If you need help with either one of those three steps, 1, 2, or 3, I want you to click one link and write this down right now. Write this down. Go to fundraisewithdan.com. Fundraisewithdan.com. Because what we assess, if you need one of the three, there's an executive leadership challenge. There's a gap that exists, and you need a thought partner. You need an individual that can come in and be able to assess and then be able to help you document, identify the gaps, prioritize what needs to be happening, and then be able to give you frameworks, methodologies, tools, tricks, and tips to be able to better collaborate so that you can scale up and scale forward. It's another episode, the Contagious Culture Podcast, and we're excited. There's some amazing things coming down the pipeline, Look, if you haven't heard, we're having a conference. It's 2 days, nothing big, only 1,500 people from around the world. Go to spreadcontagiousculture.com to find out more information and ask yourself this question. What type of culture are you spreading? The energy you bring is the culture you create. Go make yours worth catching.